Before we begin, I want to let everyone know that this is a true story. Not a single detail has been fabricated. During my first year of middle school, I developed a bit of a reputation as a wild child, and I've had several run-ins with our school's resource officer. One day when I was at home watching TV in the living room with my sister, someone rang the doorbell. This startled my younger sister because our parents weren't home. I was the oldest of 4 children, and despite my rebellious nature, I was still the big sister. I wasn't too worried about someone at our door because I figured it was probably the mailman or one of those annoying solicitors, or perhaps it was our neighbor checking in on us. I went to the door and politely asked, "Who is it?" "Open up, it's the police." A man's voice responded. By the way, our door had no peephole. That's a whole other story. But I could tell there was something off about this man's voice. It seemed cold and detached. Turned to my sister. "I don't know if this guy's really a cop. Go upstairs and go check on Jason and Ashley. I'll handle this." She darted up the stairs. The guy on the other side of the door began asking for somebody by name, claiming that they lived there. "I think you got the wrong place. No one by that name lives here." "Well, I have a warrant that says otherwise." "Are you lying to me, young lady?" "No, the guy that you're looking for doesn't live here." Then who just ran up the stairs? This immediately creeped me out. There was a long window by the front door. It had one of those thick frost layerings. It wasn't easy to tell who was inside if you were on the outside looking through it. But it didn't look like he was standing in front of the window. So when did he take a look? He would have had to focus real hard to see my sister because there were no lights on. Furthermore, it was midday, so it should have looked completely dark from where he was. I automatically felt threatened. Whoever this man was had crossed into creep territory. So now I was going to be a jerk. It was my sister, and she's obviously not the grown man that you're looking for. Why did she run? Because you're a *****ing weirdo. Excuse me. You don't talk to a police officer like that. The way he said that sounded like he was becoming annoyed, like I should just trust him on his word alone. Well, if you are a cop, you're not a very good one, because you're at the wrong address. And how do I even know that you are a cop? You should just open the door and see for yourself. That's when I saw my sister peeking around the corner at the top of the steps. "Get back," I whispered. We rarely get people at our door when my parents aren't home, but it's not impossible. I had this habit of locking the screen door. It was very strong for a screen door as well, and to clarify, it was one of those screen doors directly outside of the front door. Our front porch was open. I figured I would take the risk and open the door, just to see if this man was really a cop. When I opened up, the man on the porch did look like a cop. His hand was on his gun, and he kept looking behind me as if he was searching for something. His behavior made me trust him even less. He began grilling me about my sister, trying to catch me in a lie. "Okay, so who really ran up those stairs?" "It was my sister." "Already told you. How do I know it's your sister and not the person I'm looking for?" "Look, you have the wrong address." The man glared at me through his aviators. It was hard to see his face because of how big they were. It was like he was trying to hide his face. I know it's a silly thought for a kid, but my mom and I watched tons of true crime shows together. I know it was stupid to open the door, but I had this sinking feeling that he knew that we were alone. Up to this point, he did not ask for my parents. Not even once. I just wanted to keep him in sight, because I knew my parents would be home soon. The cop explained to me that the man he was looking for lived at our house, and according to his paperwork, this was still his current address. I informed the cop that we had been living here for a few years now, and I knew for a fact the woman before us lived here alone. This frustrated him, and he informed me in a demanding tone that he was going to check the house himself. No, you're not. Young lady, you're interfering with police business. Now open up the door before you get in trouble. I'm not stupid. I know that you need special court papers to come inside. I was in a stubborn mood, and nobody wins against me when I'm in a stubborn mood. Unless, of course, you're my parents. Cop or not, this man wasn't coming inside the house or going anywhere near my siblings. That's when he demanded to speak to my parents for the first time. Where are your parents? I want to speak to them about your behavior. He was trying to use the get me into trouble tactic to frighten me. In reality, my mom was far scarier than him. He would have been afraid of my mom because she's the type to kick someone's ass and then ask questions later. But she doesn't play around when it comes to her kids. She wouldn't assault or threaten a police officer, but he would have been in for it because my mom would have unleashed a verbal onslaught. Full-blown Karen mode. Level 10. My parents aren't here right now, they're at the grocery store. I had a feeling that he already knew my parents weren't home. Up until then, he hadn't asked for them. I didn't know if he was a cop or not, but I didn't want to aggravate him further by telling him a lie. I know that my behavior was annoying, but I wasn't going to give him a reason to call me a liar. That's when he reached for the screen door and tried to open it. That's when he discovered it was locked. Open the damn door. I said no. I then slammed the door shut so he couldn't ask me again. I snuck halfway up the stairs and listened. He began yanking and tugging on the screen door. I should arrest you and teach you a lesson. After that, he just walked through our neighbor's yard like nothing happened. That's when I realized that I never saw any cop cars in our driveway. We lived in townhomes, so I could see all the vehicles from a distance, and I didn't spot a single cruiser parked nearby. My parents showed up almost right after he left. I told my mom what happened. Well, you shouldn't have opened the door, and you should have called me right away. What's the matter with you? You're grounded. Now, come help me with the groceries. Couldn't help but notice that our neighbors checked on us far more often after this incident, and our parents got us a babysitter whenever they left the house without us. I'm not 100% sure, but something tells me that the man who came to the house wasn't a cop, and I would have put my family in danger by allowing him inside. To everyone listening, teach your kids that a uniform is just not enough. You should ask for their badge number and call the police station to verify if you can. It also doesn't hurt to invest in a strong, sturdy screen door. This happened a few years ago to me when I was still living in my childhood home down in California. I had just inherited my family home, so my cousin decided to move in with my husband and I while she was attending a college nearby. My cousin and I were both working at the Lego store at the time, but I only worked mornings and my husband and cousin worked nights, so there were many nights where I was all alone. A couple of weeks before this happened, I had been taking stuff out to my car when I realized a strange brown van with no back windows was parked across the street. As I put the stuff in the trunk, the man in the van started making these weird noises at me. I turned to see if I could get a look at his face, but his black Giants baseball cap was pulled down really far. Thinking he was just another creepy guy, I flipped him off and went back into my house. About 2 hours later, I went outside to go somewhere. He was still parked across the street. Not thinking anything of it at the time, I hopped in my car and headed towards my friend's house. As I was driving, I looked in my rear-view mirror, and I now saw that brown van following me. I turned down a whole bunch of streets. He followed me down every single one of them. I turned onto the road that my father-in-law lived on and parked, thinking if the guy tried anything, I could just run in there and be safe. When I pulled over in front of my father-in-law's house, the van slowly drove by. I looked into the van, and the man put his hand into a gun position and pointed at me, and then said bang really loudly. After that, He just hauled ass and drove off. Now I'd always been a little leery of staying home alone. My house had always given me the creeps because of how poorly lit it was. When I was home alone at night, I usually just stayed in the kitchen because of how bright it was. I was watching a TV show on my computer when all of a sudden I hear a banging on the front door, and the hand began to jiggle. It startled me for a moment until I looked at the time and saw it was around 10 p.m. I knew my cousin was going to be coming home from work about that time, so I got up and opened up the door, but there was nobody on the porch. I shouted my cousin's name, but no response came. I called his cell, and immediately she was like, "Oh, hey, I'm on my way home from work right now." Before I could say anything else, there were 3 extremely loud bangs on the door that connected the kitchen and the garage, and the knob began to shake violently. I slammed the front door closed, locked and chained it, and then ran for my room. My aunt called me while my cousin called the police, and I stayed under the blanket until my cousin arrived home. When she came and got me, I was led outside to talk to the police. I was trying to explain what had happened, but the officers along the side of my house were distracting me. I walked over to where they were, and one of the police officers held me back. They opened the gate, and I saw the door to my garage, which we always leave locked, was now wide open. All of the officers in the area pulled out their guns and went inside, but there was nobody in there. Afterwards, the police told me it was probably just some kids messing around, but if I ever get scared at home, just call them, and they'll send someone out. About a week later, I was watching something in my living room with my cousin and my husband. As I was passing by the window next to my front door, realized there was the same guy wearing that same baseball cap, standing outside on the sidewalk, just staring at our house. When he noticed me watching, he immediately locked eyes with me and slowly gave me the creepiest smile I'd ever seen. I turned and yelled for my husband to go out there, but when I turned back, he was gone. I will say, though, that the baseball cap in question is really generic. A lot of Giants fans wear it, so I can't really say it was the same exact guy, but it just felt like it was. 3 days after that, I was home alone again. I was on edge, but I was trying to ignore it, telling myself it was all going to be okay. I was baking cookies in the kitchen when I thought I heard a knock at my sliding glass door. My whole body tensed up. I slowly turned towards the door. The lights in the backyard were off, and the kitchen ones were on, so the glare on the window made it impossible to see someone standing outside. Everything was silent for a few seconds before someone banged on the door again. I screamed, but felt paralyzed in fear. The person ran on the deck from the sliding glass door to the 2 windows in the living room, and then started banging on them as well, then came back to the sliding glass door to knock, and started trying to open the door. Finally, I came to my senses, grabbed my keys, and ran outside to my car. Locked myself in it and dialed 911. We sold our house shortly after that. I still have a hard time staying home alone, even though I'm 2 states away now. When I was in my mid to late 20s, my boyfriend and I took a trip down to St. Augustine, Florida. We both really loved it there, due to the antique aesthetic and the rich history behind it all. And with it being the oldest city in America, it couldn't get any better. We stayed at this really nice hotel and walked around the city, exploring the nice museums and just getting away from the modern civilization we're all familiar with. One day in the afternoon, maybe on our 2nd or 3rd day there, we're both in our hotel room when my boyfriend says that he's gonna go to the pool to take a swim. I tell him to go do his thing while I stayed behind to work on a project for my internship. Looking back, I really wish I had gone with him. About an hour into my internship, I'd take a break and decided to take a nap, as this project really sucked the life out of me. I'd also made sure my boyfriend knew that I'd be asleep so that he wouldn't come in to wake me up. Long story short, I fall asleep for a good hour or so when I for some reason wake up. I still couldn't figure out as to why I suddenly woke up, but it was kind of like one of those moments where you just awake from a really bad dream or REM sleep. At that point, I get up when I thought I could hear what sounded like breathing coming from somewhere in the room. It was faint, but it sounded echoey to the point where I could hear it clearly. I knew it couldn't have been the AC as we had turned it off the previous night. This made me easily paranoid as I didn't know what it was or where it was coming from, and I was definitely not gonna go looking for it. So I did the only thing anyone would do. I left the room and got the attention of security from down the hall. Went on to explain that I had heard breathing and didn't know where it was coming from. Security thankfully inspected the room as well as my boyfriend, who had finally come back. However, to my surprise, they had found no one else in the room and couldn't find out what it was. My boyfriend and I just assumed it had to be the AC because apparently earlier that day, he had overheard someone say it had been broken throughout the building. That night we get into bed and go to sleep when a few hours later, my boyfriend wakes me up. At first, I wasn't sure what he wanted, but that's when I hear the breathing noises again. The same noises I had heard earlier. This time I knew my mind wasn't playing tricks on me as I was fully awake. The breathing was a lot louder than before, and that's when my boyfriend pointed to one place that we never checked. The air vent. I watch as my boyfriend goes with his phone to the vent and shines his light inside when he falls back, letting out a scream. For a brief second, I could see a face inside the vent. At that point, we run out of that room, getting the attention of hotel management. The manager, being the nice person he was, called the police, where they then inspected the whole room and took a look at the vent and the wall. Turns out, inside of the closet was a cutout of a small door frame that led into the walls. This made it easy for someone to crawl through and to place the cutout back behind them. Upon finding this, police were able to get through and arrest a man who happened to be the hotel's receptionist. He had been doing this for months, which also meant that he had been watching people change, including me. He was arrested, of course, and the hotel gave us a full refund for our stay, which was a way of pleading for us not to sue them. However, we were decent people and knew it wasn't their fault. Because of this, my boyfriend and I never go to hotels anymore and have stuck with Airbnbs instead. I know, probably not the best idea either, but better than hotels by a landslide. The scariest thing about this was that police had found various photos taken of different people sleeping in the hotel beds inside his house. Thankfully, they didn't seem to find any of me or my boyfriend, but I felt so bad for the people who don't even know. Up until now, I'm always cautious about hidden cameras or rooms in our house. It even came to a point where I'd always check behind the shower curtain thinking there would be someone there, and the one time you didn't check, someone would be there. Nothing has happened since, but my paranoia always gets the better of me. Anyway, that's our story, and I hope it makes others aware of who could be watching without your knowledge. This took place in October of 2012, when I was 16 years old. For context, I'm a female. I stand 5 foot and am certainly petite. I mention this as this will be important in the story later on. I had gone to visit my grandparents that lived in this really cute cottage in a small town of North Carolina. The name of the town won't be mentioned as I don't want this incident spreading around that town. If I could remember correctly, it was a Friday night, and my grandparents had gone out shopping for Halloween decorations. While they never celebrated Halloween, they did enjoy the vibe of it, and would commonly give out candy to trick-or-treaters. For some reason, I didn't want to go with them and told them I'd stay here to play on my DS. Back then, the DS was one of the best toys of the year, and everyone and their grandma had one. So they leave and I have the house to myself and try to make the best of it, as I'm almost never home alone. At around 8 p.m., I'm playing on my DS as usual when I get a knock at the door. Assuming it was probably my grandparents back from their errands, I rushed to the door and opened it, but instead saw some guy. He looked normal, although a bit nervous, and asked me if my parents were home and that he was here to fix the water heater. I stupidly said that I was alone, and he gives me this wicked smile that sends chills down my spine. I then tell him that he could come back when they were here, and he then puts his foot in the door saying that he could just do it now. At this point, I was clearly uncomfortable, and I'm pretty sure he noticed that I was. Being only 16, I knew what was happening, but I couldn't resist him even if I tried. Like I said, I'm petite, so I wasn't just gonna push him away. However, the more I tried to resist him, the more angry he got, as he wasn't taking no for an answer. Now, I'm not one to be rude, but I was intimidated by him, as not only did he appear to be angry, but he was also huge. Not knowing what to do, I was about to run inside the house, but that's when I see a car pull in. It was my grandparents, and my grandpa immediately took notice as to what was going on. He steps out of the car and yells at the man to leave, or he won't hesitate to blow his brains out. I see this man bolt away from the house down the road, disappearing into the night. After that, I remember them calling the sheriff, but I'm not sure if he ever got caught. The crime rate was very low in this town, so for something like this to happen was extremely rare. Thank my grandparents for arriving when they did. If they had arrived even a minute later, God only knows if I'd even be writing this or not. In 2017, I'd heard news of people dressing up as clowns and running around with knives at night. Typically, I'd brush those things off because I have my own set of problems. I, a 20-year-old female, was often up all hours of the night dealing with my screaming newborn. It was January or February, so we still had some snow. I wasn't able to get out of the house often. Taking out the trash, which was located right next to my back door, was usually the most I got out of fresh air. One morning, I took out the trash and happened to glance over to the right. Notice footprints directly under the window to my baby's room. I walked over to inspect it, and not only were there footprints, but there were also hand indentations on the window screen. Weird, but the baby slept in my room, so I wasn't very confused at the moment, but my boyfriend was losing his marbles. Fast forward a couple of days, I was up all alone around 3 a.m. and heard not exactly what I would call screaming, but more of a screeching howl. We have lots of street cats, so I assumed that's what it was, and just ignored it. Once the sun was up, I looked out the window and noticed a few new sets of footprints that really didn't make sense, because it looked like someone had just been passing in between the houses. But again, I blew it off because we had a lot of drug houses across the street, and people cross our yard before they get to their house all the time. Maybe around 4 nights later, again around 3 a.m., I'm feeding my newborn. I hear a dragging noise against the house, and from where I was sitting on the couch, could see the back door. The back door has a window with blinds on it, and it doesn't seal very well due to the wood rot on the frame. I paused the TV and listened just to see if I could hear it again. Now, directly at the back door, looking over, I can clearly see a looming figure just standing in the window, holding one of those big kitchen knives. The blinds were shut, so I'm just seeing this creepy shadow version of all this. He runs the knife across the window panes before softly knocking. Meanwhile, I'm trying to figure out what to do with the newborn latched on, because my phone is up in the bedroom and something in me just doesn't want whoever this is out of my vision. I stand up and readjust because I really didn't want a screaming baby right then. Walking into my kitchen, I flick on the light and said, "Hey man, I already called the police and I'm sure you don't want to deal with them, so why don't you go home?" Really don't know why I talked to him so calmly and normal-like, but I don't think he was expecting anyone to say anything because he just froze. It seemed like he was talking to himself over about it, seeing if it was worth it. Then a few seconds later, he darted off down the alleyway. Never had anything like that happen again, But my boyfriend sure was mad. Didn't wake him up to handle the situation or at least actually call the police. I'm not sure if this qualifies as a creepy encounter, but I sure was creeped out once my sleep-deprived self realized what happened and, more importantly, what could have happened. I'm a 36-year-old male, and I live in a ground-floor apartment in a seaside town in England with my girlfriend. This incident occurred on a Saturday night. Was home alone because my girlfriend was having an evening out with two friends that she hadn't seen in a couple of months. In 2017, I'm a night owl at heart, so I like to stay up late on the weekends, and I wanted to wait up anyway just in case her or her friends needed me to drive them home instead of getting a taxi. I'd planned to catch up on some YouTube videos and maybe play a game on my laptop. It was about 10:30 p.m. when I heard the sound of my front door handle moving. I paused the TV and listened, and I heard it again. It sounded like someone was rattling my door handle very quickly. Was confused because I wasn't expecting my girlfriend to be home or call me to pick her up until closer to midnight. So I headed to the door and looked out the peephole. The noise had stopped by the time I reached the door, and when I looked out the peephole, my blood then froze. Saw a man standing further away from my door, facing away from me, so all I could see was the back of his head. It looked like he had his head in his hands. I got a bad feeling in my stomach, and I decided to pretend that I wasn't home, figuring it was just some drunk idiot who got the wrong house. I went back to watch TV, but I had kept the noise lower than before. About half an hour passed, and I heard the same noise yet again. I was very on edge, and I immediately shot up and headed for the door. Decided this time that I'd open it, and I didn't ask him what the hell his problem was. I did just that, except when I opened the door, the guy just gave me a bewildered look before backing away. When I opened the door, I said to him, "Look, man, I don't know who you are, but I saw you trying to open my door earlier. If you don't leave right now, I'm contacting the police." I didn't recognize this man as a neighbor, and his eyes looked tired, with black circles underneath them, and he looked solemn. I stood there watching him as he backed off, before he went to the entryway to our apartment block, and just sat there, head in his hands. I went back into my house, but before I did, I then said, "Just go home, man," and then shut the door. I wasn't sure if I should call the police because I didn't want to waste their time if the guy simply had the wrong house, which I felt he maybe had since he looked at me so confused. I shot a text to my girlfriend explaining the situation, and I told her to make sure she calls me when she wants to come home because I didn't want her to get a taxi and risk running into the guy outside. I told her to not cut her night short, and I was fine picking her up at any time, and that I'd drive her friends home too if they wanted. I knew she wouldn't be out until 4 a.m. because we're both too old to party like that nowadays, but I didn't want her to cut her night short either. Ended up turning the TV off and just sitting on my phone until my girlfriend called just after midnight to say that she was ready to come home. When I went to go get her, the apartment entryway was now empty, as were the stairs leading to the upper floors from what I could see. I didn't see the man again, although I was very vigilant walking along the street to my car. When my girlfriend and I got home, she told me that she thought that he was probably just a drunk and trying to get into a friend's house, and I agreed, although to me he looked more tired than drunk, but I guess you never really know. I have no idea if he knew someone in our apartment block, or if he really was trying to do something more sinister. Just hope that he never comes back, and I'm really glad that we always kept our front door locked and bolted, because if I had it unlocked that night, he could have whaled it right in and done God knows what.